This is The Hypothesis, the show where industry experts debate and discuss growth marketing approaches, digital advertising tactics, measurement plans, as well as creative and growth strategies.
I'm Eric Sloan, VP of Data and Strategy at Thrive Digital.
I'm Maddie or Madeline, and I'm an Associate Director of Strategy here at Thrive.
I'm your moderator, lay marketer, and asker of clarifying questions, Santana Blanchette. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We've got two of our smartest people from the data department here, and we want to get into a spicy hot take, which is all about audiences. So our hypothesis today is that our data can tell us a lot about our audience. I guess to start with, I wanted to find some terms and ask how you both would explain how brands and marketers like to define their audience or what kind of things they're looking for when they talk about audience.
Audience can be built off of a number of different data sources. And it depends who is building that audience, sometimes what data source is going to be used. When we're thinking about media strategy, brands can rely on their first-party data to build an audience. That is often going to be pretty limited, depending on whether they're surveying their existing customers around, what's your gender and what are your interests? Like, we don't see brands typically doing that. It feels a little bit icky these days. So, they're typically getting a sense of age and gender being more inferred. And so most brands have a good sense of kind of age gender split of their customer base. And then if it's a more of like a B2B customer, they might be collecting things like job titles, et cetera, and more things relevant to the user's career. But often for kind of your generic e-commerce brand, I think the first party data is pretty limited to kind of the broad view of demographic breakdown. And then a lot of media planners are going to rely on audience research tools. So different survey-based tools and market research tools like Kantar or like GWI or Ipsos or what have you, that will survey the general population and collect information about interests and demographics and what kind of products they're considering. And so media strategists will start to build a picture of a target audience based off of those tools. And then on the other side, you could actually use your media platforms to understand, again, using the platform's audience collection data. So for example, Google or Meta will collect birthdays and genders and things like that associated with Gmail and Meta accounts. They can give you a demographic breakdown of who's buying your product, and then also like an audience split based on what they might be interested in and things like that. So there's all these different disparate sources that can be kind of pulled together. As with anything, there's no one source of truth to tell you all of your information about your audience. It can be pretty limited. But often as media planners, we'll use a kind of a combination of those different signals to build an idea of who is buying the product and who would be interested in the product based on that, and then who to basically go for and how to build that into a target audience.
I think there's a couple of things to level set here on too, right? Because there's a target audience, which is from a media buying standpoint, who are we actually trying to get in front of? But then there's also, depending on who's talking, audience may mean, for example, the ideal customer profile. Who are our best customers, for example? It could mean the total addressable market. It could mean the profile of the existing customers. And, there's going to be different segments within that. When you start getting into target audiences, there's, of course, like who you're trying to reach at different stages of the marketing funnel. So people who are just problem aware, for example, people who are product aware, as a different example, people who have been on the website doing retargeting and all of those kinds of things. So I think that the term audience itself can be used across a broad sort of spectrum of these things. And so just to level set, when we do say target audience, we're talking about the media buying sphere. So who are the people that we're trying to put media or advertising in front of?
To your point around the funnel strategy, audience is far less a lever of importance in terms of demographic breakdowns and affinities. And it's far more about just who's in market, who is buying this right now and casting a wide net. So yeah, audience means different things to different marketers, and what their objective is going to paint that portrait differently.
When you get into the details of what how an audience is defined, though, whether that's by demographics or geography or general interest or retargeting in the case of like someone that's been on the website, like all of those details are really just defined by who you're trying to reach, rather than demographics being for a certain type of industry or something like that, or a certain type of advertising. You wouldn't necessarily say that like all awareness advertising is just demographic based, as an example, right? Whereas if you're in fast moving consumer goods or something like that, you might be going after more demographic based advertising and be building audiences that way. Whereas if you're in a B2B sense, then you may want, as Maddie was saying, like you may want to be looking more at, firmographic information or, certain profile information about the audience that you're going after.
So then I want to get into, we're saying that there's so many different ways to meet audiences, so many different ways to capture them or define them.
It's just a group of people.
Yeah, 100%. But I think what I've really brought you all here today is to join me in the bashing of marketing personas. These like broad catch-all, if we're talking about a B2B brand, let's say, marketing Maggie, she's 33 and loves to walk her dog along the riverside, and she only buys new software in the waxing crescent of the moon. Like these really weird marketing personas that we've introduced. I would love to hear what you both think of them, if they're useful, if there's any merit to them, if we don't, tell me about them, what you think of them.
Well, okay. As a data strategist who started off as a performance marketing strategist, this feels like a rhetorical question because obviously I don't come from a brand background where these personas would be created. Therefore, I can definitely participate in the bashing, but I also want to be aware of my own bias here. I think that through a creative lens, marketing personas can be useful. I think it depends the level of detail, as you said. I think if it's a general shape of a customer, great. If you get down to more and more granular details, I think it always becomes less representative of a large group of people and therefore less useful. But from a creative lens, it's useful to ensure that we're building different messaging that speaks to different end users who might experience the product differently or face different unique challenges that the product could solve in different ways. I guess I'll give more of a B2B example here. Of course, a CRM product, an advertisement focused more on an IT professional who's more concerned about, data integration within a tech stack or security would be different than the creative that's speaking to the marketing professional that's dealing with different problems day to day, needing accessible insights around attribution or what have you. So I think insofar as building creative messaging that's differentiated and building, user experience and content, marketing personas are useful. I think, again, within reason, let's not force granularity when there's no point. Anything that gets more and more specific and segmented just loses value because we're speaking to a smaller and smaller portion of our addressable audience. And there's so much more volatility in what to expect and even, our ability to build predictions off of smaller segments of users. But also then from a media lens and from a data lens, of course, we don't know marketing Maggie and, her dog and how many kids she has and everything like that. So from a data lens and from a media buying lens, we can't translate that persona into a targeting strategy. And so that's where that also falls very short. We're dealing with different targeting capabilities across a bunch of different media platforms. It's not the best way to budget, to split audiences into these really super fragmented kind of personas. It's not the best way to drive insights or learn at a higher level. And it's just kind of not possible a lot of the time. So I guess a bit more of a nuanced perspective, useful to some degree, but not super practical when it comes to media buying.
Yeah, I think that's where those personas get so much hate, I think, is that they're too specific and they're sort of not generalizable for the total addressable market or even your target market within that. The one thing I would say, though, that they are good at is reminding teams that on the other side of the advertising, there's real people, right? And they have priorities that are not just buying B2B software or, going online to buy some widget from an e-commerce store, right? It sort of reminds you that your customers, the people that you're reaching, actually have this full life, and they may have a dog and they may have, a 9 to 5 that they dislike or something like that. And I think that it's a useful heuristic for those teams to sort of use as a way to kind of get more into the mindset of a potential customer. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like if you translate those personas into targeting, that's useless, right? It's not useful for translating it into advertising targeting, but it is useful, to sort of remind teams that we are trying to reach real people. There's a real person there in your performance report showing how many impressions or how many views or how many clicks or how many conversions. Those are real people, right? And so I do think that, having some kind of mechanism to remind marketing teams and media buying teams that those are real people, I think that that's still useful to a certain degree. I just wouldn't put that much stock on it.
Yeah. And again, I think it's more so a branding tool than anything. Like even like when you're looking at a target market like the USA, ensuring that you're not missing out on specific consumer segments or alienating consumer segments with your like broader messaging strategy, is that you're taking into account these different users and their different lifestyles and building strategies for each of them. Because there's also the fact that like from a brand perspective, one end user might not jive with, I mean, I guess we're probably talking about like bigger brands here, but might not jive with one message that another one would.
From my perspective, there's also just better ways of doing it, right? I think, for example, understanding customer voice through reviews, through customer interviews, getting to know the customer, I think is a really, really important part of marketing. The marketing team at any organization should be the closest to the customer, aside from maybe client service. So it's really important to understand the customer. It's just that those personas end up coming across as being so specific that you can't really apply it in a general way to the target audience. So when I say that it's useful to remind marketing teams that there is a real person on the other end, I'm more so meaning that it can be a mechanism to help with that. But there's also better alternatives, right? Getting close to customers in the B2B sense, marketing teams should be, talking to actual customers, joining sales calls if they can, those types of things, so that they understand what the actual objections are of customers. And they can then, of course, better understand the market and better understand how to market to them.
Something that always strikes me in these conversations as I talk to yourselves and performance and creative is how I think this is why it's so important to define your terms, right? Because audience and personas might mean one specific thing to brand and creative, and they're super important. And then they might mean an entirely different thing to, bottom of funnel performance teams. And I think it really ties back to, if I'm hearing you correctly, often we'll say on this podcast, and I'll hear about in general, which is like creative is the new targeting in many ways. And so I think like maybe some of that audience data can be really useful to brand and creative team, but how it gets like utilized in performance is a lot different. So I guess pivoting slightly, what are the disconnects you see between data being collected and insights being used to make decisions when it comes to how to target those audiences?
I think one of the challenges is just people taking insights and making strategic decisions off of, again, too small a segment of information about their audience. So for example, running like a 50K campaign in a media channel and seeing a demographic breakdown and seeing that, a higher proportion of the converters or those who purchase are, let's say, age 25 to 34 and female, and then saying, okay, let's shift all of our targeting to that segment. First of all, I think the sample size is way too small. And if you look at your overall customer base and overall trends across first party data, that would start to normalize and you'd start to see maybe some different trends, but also again, like choosing to go narrow in on specific targets, audience targets, because they're the best performers, I think again is a really limiting strategy, because it won't address like the rest of where the majority of your dollars are coming from. So I would say like making reactive decisions off of small segments of the audience or small segments of the media budget is one problem that I see happening.
Yeah, it really comes down to the inference, doesn't it? Right? Like, what does someone take from the data, right? Because there's like, we're not starved for data in marketing. There's tons of data everywhere. We have analytics platforms, we have ad platforms, we have first party data, we have, third party data enrichment. Like there's data everywhere, right? And yeah, I've just seen it so many times where there's a small uptick or like one particular segment indexes higher than all of the others or something along those lines. And that's seen as a quote unquote insight, when really it could be a number of different things. It could just be the actual makeup of the target audience that you were able to reach on that particular ad platform. That doesn't necessarily mean that that segment is more valuable to the business. The other thing it could be, because when Maddie and I are on this podcast, it always comes back to incrementality. It could also be that like your best performing segments are actually the least incremental because they know about your brand the most, right? And so you're looking at these reports that are telling you that, hey, this particular audience or segment of the audience is performing the best. Well, they might be just the closest to actually making a purchase. And these ad platforms have such good algorithms that they're finding those people. So by segmenting down on them, you may actually be making your campaigns worse.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, which is how granular can you get with audience segmentation, and at what point is it too fragmented to be actionable? Like how granular is too granular with all the data available?
Well, I mean, you could go and set up like 10 to 20 different campaigns with different audiences in, say, Meta, and that your product could appeal to. You could set up 50 different audiences, all segmented out, but give it a limited budget and some level of requirement for clarity and learning. That would be a recipe for disaster. What do we do with 20 tiny budgets across 20 audiences? What do we learn? What's the point? What kind of benchmarks are we building across any kind of baseline of target audience? It's just not an efficient way to market.
But it seems like you're doing something.
Yeah, it's like, let's test another 5 audiences. Again, like we're probably also hitting like 1% within those audiences. There's massive overlaps between each audience group. So how differentiated are they really anyways? It seems like we're potentially learning, and we find that one drove a $40 CPA versus a $61. But again, like tiny sample sizes, like all of that, like it's just kind of optimization. It's not super strategic.
Let's talk about that overlap for a moment, because that's a really good point. If you take two, let's use a simple example, and you take two audiences that are targeted towards different interests, the amount of overlap between those audiences is massive typically, right? Depending on how broad the interest is. And so are you really targeting two different audiences? Most likely not, right? You're actually targeting sort of the broader audience, and there's this huge overlap. Picture a Venn diagram, right? And there's going to be this huge amount of overlap in between those two audiences. And so even if you notice differences in performance between those two audiences, like you can't really say that it's because of that audience split. That's false causation, right? You're looking at those two audiences. The way that the ad platform has optimized within those two audiences is going to be different. There's all sorts of kind of hidden factors between the performance of those two that you're not really getting a true insight if you just look at the performance at face value.
And this is why they say creative is the new audience, or whatever you said, Santana. Like for bottom of funnel, we're hitting such a tiny percent of our target audience, and the massive overlap between them that we're often not making any definitive statements about what kind of user would purchase our product over another. We're just going after the in-market segments within these broader buckets.
The goal of the campaign means a lot as well. If you're trying to boost awareness for a particular brand and you're trying to grow market share, let's say, you need to overcome the market share that you have with a higher share of voice for that market share, right? And so really what you're trying to do there is you're just trying to reach as many people as possible within your total addressable market, right? And so it's more about reach. And so getting to this point where you're being hyper granular is not really being effective, because CPMs are going to increase the more granular that you get. It's not really going to be all that effective, because you're trying to assign particular segments on top of your target or your addressable market. And really what you're trying to do is just boost awareness within the addressable market, right? And so that's different than a campaign that's hyper-focused on performance, where you're just trying to, capture people who are in market ready to buy right this second, right? And so to translate that to like different business models, in one case, if you had a product that is kind of an impulse buy e-com product or something like that, you're not really trying to drive a ton of awareness, right? And so you're not going to have a ton of awareness campaigns. You're trying to get in front of people who are going to purchase this type of product. Maybe it's more of a commodity product type thing. You're trying to get in front of those people that have the need. They're looking to solve a problem today. They're looking to purchase. So you just need to get that in front of them, right? If you're selling a high ACV B2B product, that's going to be completely different. You have to think about buying committees and the sales cycle and what information do they need to know ahead of time to even get to the stage where they want a demo and they're actually in the consideration set. So totally different approaches. And I think that is a huge driver of how you should set up your target audience strategy.
And one more point to that, if you are focused on the awareness side of things, the brand side of things, segmenting, to Eric's point, not a great approach, but also stacking audiences is not a great approach either, because then you're really limited in being able to actually penetrate the audience effectively and build up enough frequency of exposure that those audiences start to recognize you, remember who you are, start to actively consider you, or at least have that mental availability for your brand when they do decide to become in market. So if you, again, are spreading budget across far too massive an audience, you're going to be really limited in your ability to build up awareness lift, consideration lift, etc. So segmentation and actually being more tightly focused is really important on that side of the marketing funnel as well.
Yeah, that's such a great point, because that speaks to the size of the audience, right? We haven't even talked about that yet. Depending on the budget that you have, like you need to align that with the size of the audience that you're going after, because that penetration in that audience is so important.
If we're talking about reaching certain segments and reaching certain demographics, like would you say that creative should be doing most of the heavy lifting here? Like where are the areas that you think audience segmentation and advertising has more of a role to play?
Well, I think, first of all, if the product is more niche and it's not meant for everyone. So, for example, if it's a product that's geared to women, obviously, it's going to be important that you are targeting women. Maybe it's like a product that only appeals to women between ages 25 to 50. Obviously, that's going to be more significant. But also, if you have different product sets that appeal to, retail, men's versus women's, that segmentation is important. Again, if you're B2B, you want to find media platforms that give you that ability to segment and find your decision makers as much as possible and build audiences in that way. It would be, I think, very much based on your product. And again, the way that you can carve out messages to speak to different end users, how much audience segmentation is important.
I mean, on the topic of creative, though, it is important to remember that creative is doing segmentation in the background that you're not controlling, right? So like if you were to, I'm not suggesting anyone do this, but let's say you did have a brand that was focused solely on selling products to women and you targeted the entire United States, just open targeting. A lot of the ad platforms are just going to find the fact that like women are engaging with this creative. And so, it's going to start to target towards those people anyways.
Isn't that a waste of budget though?
Yeah, if you're going on a reach and frequency strategy,
it won't be as perfect as segmenting it. I'm not saying anyone does this, but yeah.
No, it depends on your strategy again. It depends what you're telling the platform to go after, right?
Yeah, if it's just straight reach, then yeah, that won't happen, right? But if you're optimizing towards conversions or clicks or some type of engagement, then it is going to optimize towards that sort of audience. And I just use that as an example, though, because even when you use a targeted audience, and so let's say you ratchet it down to only women in a particular household income bracket, in particular geos, even between certain ages, etc. The creative is still going to end up getting optimized towards certain segments of that audience if you are optimizing towards, let's say, engagement or conversions or something along those lines.
Are there any other topics that you feel like we missed in this data and audience? This might be a bit of a shorter episode, and that's okay if we've covered what we need to. But I'm curious if there's anything else revolving around how we use data to inform our audience targeting that we didn't touch on that we should.
I think a big one is that a lot of brands miss out on using their own data that they're collecting through tools like Google Analytics, through Search Console, etc., to understand the behavior of their audience. And so there's lots of ways of like building personas and thinking about, who are existing customers and all of that kind of stuff. But I find that there's a huge gap in the industry of people looking at how is the market actually interacting with our brand, right? And so what types of content are they consuming on the website? What types of keywords are they using to actually search in this particular industry? So you can access a lot of that information through Search Console, for example, Google Search Console. They can tell you information about like the actual queries that people are using, looking at reviews I mentioned earlier, looking at sort of all of these different ways that the actual market is interacting with your brand, I think is a big missing gap. And it can tell you a lot about how things are changing as well. So if you change your messaging in your brand campaigns, for example, that's going to shift the way that the market actually interacts with the brand. Maybe keywords change. We've seen this before, launching big brand campaigns for specific products and so forth. The actual keywords that people are using are actually shifting for when they're searching for the brand, right? And so that's not only an indicator of how well your brand advertising is impacting the market, but it also gives you this indication of the way that certain markets are seeing the brand. So I think that's a big missing piece that a lot of brands don't really put a lot of thought into. They more so focus on, for Search Console, for example, like how many top of page results do we have? How many clicks are being generated? Is our SEO, driving more visits over time or sessions over time, et cetera, with less thought about what that interaction actually looks like for the person.
I wonder too, like if it ties back to something that I've noticed tends to be a theme in our episodes, which is, and even in just our work, there's like almost a fragmentation between departments, right? Like the data that performance might have access to could be really useful to brand or to customer experience or to sales. And there's just not the mechanisms to like deliver the data back and forth and just have these conversations of like, hey, there are these trends.
Yep, absolutely. All the time. In-house analytics teams will build complex models for sales teams and not marketing teams to be able to leverage those insights similarly. Yeah, there's always silos.
Yeah. Or complex like lead scoring on the marketing side that doesn't factor in the actual conversations that are happening with sales, even though the sales team might be using these tools like Gong or whatever that are like actually recording the sales calls and pulling out snippets out of it. None of that data is actually making it back to the lead scoring model. It's just such a massive gap, right?
Yeah.
We have an episode coming up on lead scoring this season, so I'm excited to hear your take on that.
Is it going to be us?
There's going to be more than just us, yeah.
Okay.
But you'll be in that episode, Eric. Yeah, it just feels like there's so much good stuff that gets bled between departments just due to lack of like ways of delivering the information back and forth. Or do you think it's a lack of them knowing what's valuable to the other team?
Yeah, I think knowing what the other team can make use of, also knowing what's available, what's being collected is, I guess, the biggest warning with any marketing strategy. And it kind of falls along the similar lines of don't make decisions off of small sample sizes, is that, we're making decisions off the siloed information that we have. Like the bigger effort should be collecting more information, talking to other teams, sharing insights, and making sure that strategy is broad enough that it can encompass the bigger picture and not just the 2 segments that you saw an impact from on this channel. So not rushing to over optimize off of the most recent or the most obvious signals that are sitting in front of you, more so building a collection of insights that are driving a bigger, longer term strategy, and then making sure that there's also consistency in the audience approach. So you're not changing all your targeting next month and saying, okay, well, what did this drive? Because while there are these different targeting buckets too, per Eric's earlier note, we are kind of going after the same addressable audience, but we need better kind of stability in terms of our targeting and everything that we're collecting so that we can actually benchmark over time responses and changes between the audience and what we're putting out there. A caution is to make sure that we're not making rapid changes to how we're defining or targeting our audience or splitting it out, because then we lose that through line and the ability to kind of collect trend data over time across the audience.
Doesn't it always come back to incentives as well? Yep. To the point of why is marketing not getting this information from sales, and sales is not sharing it or what have you? It's marketing is focused on MQLs or focused on platform ROAS or Google Analytics ROAS or what have you. And in the case of actual sales teams, they're focused on close rates and all those kinds of things. And so the customer experience has been broken into these pieces. And the incentives are set up so that each of these teams only really cares about certain chunks of that customer experience. So once something has been sold, then it goes to CSMs and client service, right? And so it's this constant handoff. Whereas one thing that I've been seeing more of is organizations that set themselves up more so that the entire customer journey is under this umbrella of go to market or what have you, whatever you want to call it. And so then the incentives are more aligned, right? And so marketing is actually looking at how much revenue they're driving, right? And because driving really bad leads that don't close is still within marketing's purview, right?
Well, that's it. I'm changing the hypothesis of this episode to audiences are everyone's problem. On that happy note, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And I feel like we all learned a lot about what is not and is possible and even necessary with audience segmentation. So thank you both. This has been The Hypothesis. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes or to get in touch, find us at thehypothesisshow.com or at Thrive Digital, both linked for you in our description box. And if you liked today's episode, we'd love if you'd rate and review wherever you're listening or watching. Thanks.